What's the worst thing about going on a Royal Caribbean cruise? Today, I'm going to dive into the reasons why people avoid Royal Caribbean and why I think you should still consider Royal Caribbean up next. Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. I'm keeping it real today because at the end of the day, Royal Caribbean is not perfect. I am the first to admit that. While I'm a big Royal Caribbean fanboy, always admitted that from the start, they're not perfect. Not everything is exactly the best out there, but overall, I definitely prefer a Royal Caribbean cruise. But when we talk to people who are considering cruise lines, there are a couple of reasons that usually come up as to reasons why perhaps they don't want to sail on Royal Caribbean. Some of these reasons are legit or at least based on their own personal experience or preferences, but I wanted to go over the 5 things that really stand out, the 5 reasons that people usually avoid a Royal Caribbean cruise and why it shouldn't really stop you from booking that particular sailing. Number 1, and I think this is probably the number 1 reason I'm going to guess if we had a poll or did any kind of scientific research into it, and that is that Royal Caribbean has big ships and they're building bigger ships and there are thousands of passengers on board. When you consider any cruise out there, there's plenty of choices after all, but with Royal Caribbean, they are known for having the big ships. In fact, they build the biggest ships in the world with 5,000, 6,000, even as many as 7,000 passengers, if of course they maxed out all the inventory. It's a bit of a misleading stat, but regardless of that fact, 4,000, 5,000 passengers is a lot of people on a cruise ship. There are other cruise lines that have significantly less passengers on board. Heck, if you go on sister brand Celebrity Cruises, their newest ships in the Edge class have just around 3,000 passengers on board. So it's a pretty big gap there. And when you talk about more passengers on board, people envision crowds and lots of people contending with what to do. Now, that is definitely true in the sense that, yes, there's more people on board a ship. But that being said, when you build a bigger ship, you get more space. And when you talk about Royal Caribbean's big ships, number 1, the company is very cognizant of that fact. They're not delusional in the sense that they think, oh no, that ship we designed for 4,000, yeah, it can handle 7,000 as well. I mean, they want to make sure that the experience is good overall and it doesn't feel crowded. One of the major innovations that Royal Caribbean had with the Oasis class cruise ships, which at the time of this recording are still the biggest ships in the fleet and the world, but of course the Icon class will soon supersede that. Anyway, they developed these concepts in the neighborhoods, and basically Royal Caribbean said if we're going to build a ship as large as the Oasis class, we want to make sure there's enough space. But how do you do that? Well, part of that is making sure that people are busy doing other things, that basically everyone's not doing the same thing at the same time. When it comes to the experience on a cruise ship, people are looking for different activities, right? Some people will go to the pool, some people want to eat, they'll be in their cabin, they want to go see a show. And so Royal Caribbean designed neighborhoods not only to make the ship a little bit easier to navigate, but also to draw people to different corners of the ship. So you're not always doing the same thing. Great example of this is look at a past cruise compass from a Royal Caribbean Oasis class cruise ship. You're going to find a plethora of activities on there, lots to do that'll keep you busy in the morning, afternoon, and evenings. And the idea is that it draws you in different directions. So when you're on an Oasis class cruise ship like Wonder of the Seas or Oasis of the Seas, and you're around on any given day, you're not going to be among 5,000, 6,000 passengers. Rather, you're going to have other people doing other things, and it helps with the crowds quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that if you go on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, it's going to feel like a yacht or a private ship or anything like that. It's not. You will see other people. There will be lines occasionally when you run into certain activities. It's the nature of the beast. I would also point out that even if you're on a smaller ship, a ship that has 2,000, 3,000 passengers, there are still lines and crowds that occur, especially on shore excursions or different activities that occur on board the ship. It's not like other cruise lines that have smaller ships, have no lines or crowds at all. It's just kind of what you're going to get on any cruise line, quite frankly. Maybe if you don't go on perhaps a luxury line, but that's not really what we're talking about. Among the mass market cruise lines, heck, among the premium cruise lines, that is still a fact. So it's not to say that if you avoid Royal Caribbean, you're going to avoid lines or crowds altogether. Now, I get it. Maybe the big ships aren't for you, which is why Royal Caribbean does have other ships in the fleet, smaller ships in the fleet, ships that have right around 2,000 or 3,000 passengers. And these are classic cruise ships, the Vision class, the Radiance class. I'm going to even include the Voyager class in here. They're not small ships, but I think in the grand scheme of things, they kind of skew more in that direction these days. Anyway, the point is that these ships offer plenty to do. They're significantly smaller than the Oasis class ships, but you're not compromising on the activities and amenities that you're going to find on a cruise ship that Royal Caribbean is known for. And while it may not have as much to do as the bigger ships out there, there's still fun ships to go on. And best yet, there's some really great prices on those ships. So, yes, you're going to find bigger and bigger ships with Royal Caribbean. In fact, the biggest ships in the world. And there will be more people on board those ships than other ships. But number one, other lines are going to have lines and crowds. Number two, more importantly, I would also argue that you could still have a great time and there's not going to be as crowded as you might think. Number two, extra costs drive up cruise costs. Now listen, when you look at a Royal Caribbean cruise, you go to the website or you call your travel agent, they're going to say, great news, here's the price. For a family of four, you're going to pay whatever it is, right? You'll see great prices advertised, $3.99 for a 7-night cruise, or $5.99, depends on the ship, obviously, but, and the time and the promotion, but you get it. You see these really low attractive rates, and you think, boy, this is a really affordable cruise. And then, of course, if you've gone on Royal Caribbean, you'll know there's a lot of opportunities to buy extras, drink packages, shore excursions, Wi-Fi, the spa. There's plenty of ways to add on to your cruise costs, and all that adds up. There's gratuities, there's port fees, there's taxes, and at the end of the day, what you pay for the cruise fare probably is not going to be your final cost. That's, I think, pretty normal. In fact, I'm struggling to think, quite frankly, how likely or common it is for people to really just book the cruise fare and never book anything extra. You certainly could do that, but I think when people are on vacation, they inevitably gravitate towards splurging a little bit. That's what vacation is all about, that you get to spend time and enjoy it, and it's more about getting us away from it all and enjoying your time away on vacation, quite frankly, and that's spending a little bit more on it. Now, that being said, here's the reality. Yes, there are a lot of extra costs that come up with the cruise, but the reason why this isn't necessarily a reason to avoid Royal Caribbean is because it is an option for you. It is a modular cost, if you will. I think Royal Caribbean's basic premise is, let's present a cruise cost and let you decide which options you want. If you're sitting there and say, well, I wish Royal Caribbean would include more in their cruise fare. I wish that Wi-Fi, drinks, and something else would be included there. Yeah, that'd be great, but what if you don't want those things? Because there's a lot of people out there who don't want Wi-Fi, who don't care about a drink package, who don't care about necessarily doing a ton of shore excursions. If that's the case, well then obviously, why would you want to pay for it? Because at the end of the day, if something is included in your cruise fare, you're paying for it. I mean, the reality is, look at a luxury cruise line, right? A luxury cruise line costs way more than Royal Caribbean. They include a lot more, but that's because you're paying for it in the cruise fare. That's the reality of it. So yes, there are extra costs that will cost you more in the long run for your cruise fare, or at least your vacation budget. But the bottom line is these are your choices to make, and there are ways to help mitigate those costs. You could pre-purchase things before the cruise, and that is still one of my best tips for saving money on a Royal Caribbean cruise, because at the end of the day, the extra cost add-ons are going to cost less if you pre-book them compared to than if you book them on board the ship. This is especially true for drink packages, shore excursions, and the spa. You'll definitely save a lot of money by pre-booking these things. So, number one, you could pre-book these things. Number two, these extra costs, by the way, are pretty universal among all cruise lines that are not like luxury lines. You're going to pay for drinks and Wi-Fi and shore excursions on other lines. Certainly some of the premium lines like Celebrity and Princess may include some of those things in their cruise fare, but that may drive up the cruise fare to begin with, and it might be more of a wash in the grand scheme of things. But at least you have that choice with Royal Caribbean to add on some of those extra costs there. And if you want to get them, great. And if not, if you're not into drinking and Wi-Fi and the spa, you don't have to pay them. I think that's more of an advantage than a disadvantage. Next on my list is it's hard to get tickets to shows. And this is definitely true. I think this is a very valid point or contention issue with Royal Caribbean. So if you're going on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, especially the newer ships we're primarily talking about, the Oasis, Quantum, and Icon class cruise ships, there is an opportunity to get into the different shows. And these shows, the entertainment on Royal Caribbean is really second to none. Royal Caribbean really prides itself on that. So if you want to see a show, whether it's a Broadway show or an Aqua Theater show, you have to usually get a ticket on the bigger ships. And these tickets are free, by the way, to get, but they go very quickly. The theaters are very small, and they're available pre-cruise to book. And if you're not really on the spot about booking it, you'll quickly find that they're not available. And that can mean potentially not getting in to see the shows. Now, in my opinion, I think that in reality, there's always a standby line, and the standby line usually works out. The problem with the standby line is there's no guarantees, right? And it still requires you to show up a little bit earlier, get in, go and wait in line, and then, hope for the best. Again, in my experience, whether it's a comedy show, Aqua Theater, or the main theater, there are a lot of no-shows for people who book the tickets ahead of time. A lot of people are booking these things, about a month ahead of time. They see it as an option, they book it because they can, and then they get on board the ship and reality sets in. They're having a great time at the pool deck. They're too tired from the pool deck. They're doing something else. Something else is happening. Their dinner's taking longer than they thought. So people no-show, especially because there's no penalty for no-shows, and of course the tickets themselves were free to begin with. So the standby line usually works out, but it's frustrating when you're booking a cruise and you're excited to see these shows, and by the time you go to make a reservation, it's not available. Or, which I think is quite common, people get on board the ship unaware of the whole ticketing thing that could have been done before the cruise, and yeah, it's already gone. So, yes, it can be difficult to get tickets for these shows in advance. I would just say that if you get in the standby line 30 minutes ahead of time, you'll probably still make those shows out there, but it definitely is something that stands out about the Royal Caribbean cruise ships, especially with some of these amazing shows you can see on board. Something else that I think is certainly a contention point, something I hear a lot about, are the inflexible penalties for changing or canceling your cruise. Now listen, Royal Caribbean offers refundable or non-refundable cruise fare, but it seems like everybody books non-refundable cruise fare because there's a major price gap between refundable and non-refundable in most cases. And it also just defaults to non-refundable, so a lot of people don't even know that there is an option. Anyway, I digress. The point is that when you book non-refundable cruise fare and you change your mind about the cruise, whether it's the sail date or the ship or both, you're going to incur a penalty. And listen, life happens for a lot of reasons, and it's hard to plan ahead. One of my favorite tips is to tell people to book your cruise months, if not years in advance. It's a great tip until, of course, something happens in your life, which is pretty common. Job change, your kid's schedule, someone gets sick, preferences, somebody drops out of the vacation, your daughter's boyfriend breaks up and now they got to change who's in there, your daughter gets a new boyfriend, now you need to add a room. All these things can change your plans. And if you do that with a non-refundable cruise fare, you're going to incur a change fee. And these are very inflexible, by the way. Royal Caribbean sticks to its guns, no matter how good of a sob story you've got about why you can't cruise or you need to change your cruise. They sympathize with you, but they're not changing the policy. And I've seen this time and time again. So, should that stop you from booking a Royal Caribbean cruise? I would say no. A lot of Royal Caribbean cruise fans, people that cruise a lot, would tell you that while there is the penalty for it, it's still cheaper to take the change fee than it is to cancel altogether. Second of all, when it comes to booking well in advance, the risk of a change fee is still more advantageous than waiting to book at the last minute. What I mean by that is if you book your cruise, 9, 10, 12 months ahead of time, you're going to find a better price for that cruise on average than you would if you waited for all your ducks to be lined up in a row and tried to book at the last minute. Assuming, of course, there's actually, cabins available for you to book. So there are inflexible penalties. I mean, you could certainly book refundable cruise fare. That's something I still do, even though it does cost a little bit more, but it does provide me peace of mind at the end of the day. So you could do that, or you could simply understand that, yes, there's a change fee, but the change fee, if you're booking well in advance, still could be more advantageous to you because you're getting a better price overall. And lastly, I think if I was thinking about the things that are truly quote-unquote worse about cruising with Royal Caribbean, and it's not very adult focused. Now, as a father of 2 daughters who are still in school, I don't personally have a problem with this, and quite frankly, I've always thought Royal Caribbean has and always will be a family cruise line. I still see a lot of comments, people who wish that Royal Caribbean had more adult focus. Heck, a lot of people wish that there was actually adult-only sailings for Royal Caribbean. And I do understand where they're coming from on that. Certainly, if you don't have kids and you're not looking for a family-type vacation, it can be a little frustrating with that. So, should that stop you from booking a Royal Caribbean cruise? Well, number one, if you're truly set on absolutely 0 children on your cruise, well then, yeah, I guess so, because by definition, there will always be kids. Even if you pick some of the most exotic, long itineraries that usually don't draw a lot of families, there will still be at least a couple of kids on there. That being said, I would say that if you're looking to get more adult focus, or at least less kids, whichever is more important to you, number one, look for a longer sailing. Once you get past 7-night sailings, a lot of families are unwilling or unable to go on those cruises. Basically, 7-night and shorter sailing, especially in North America, are when a lot of families choose to cruise because it works out really well. For Americans in general, 7 nights is the sweet spot for vacation from both work and school. And so that works out quite a bit. Number two, avoid the school calendar when they have time off. So summer, spring break, Christmas, Thanksgiving, these are times of the year in which kids are out of school and families are looking to get away. So if you can go on a longer sailing, a 9, 10, 14 night cruise, you're going to probably find a lot less kids. Heck, if you do a transatlantic sailing, I still think those are probably the most adult-focused cruises because there are just simply less kids on board. So if you pick one of those sailings, it'll help mitigate the problem. It will never get rid of it, but it will help. At the end of the day, Royal Caribbean is still a family cruise line, and whether you're on a 21-night cruise or a 3-night cruise, the focus still remains the same. The idea is they offer activities for everything and everybody on board. Now, of course, there are areas of the ship dedicated for just adults. The solarium on most ships is pretty much where you can go to avoid kids under the age of 16 in there. And for most people that I speak to, it seems to be good enough. You know, kids at the end of the day, especially my kids, they don't want to hang out in the adult areas. They find it extremely boring. Now, other families may be different and they bring their kids with them regardless. But you're right. It's not adult focused. If you're looking for like purely 100% adults, no kids, I don't think you're ever going to find that on Royal Caribbean, short of a charter sailing. But I think that you can find sailings that have significantly less kids on board to make the experience just a little bit more to your liking. So there you have 5 of the worst things about cruising with Royal Caribbean, and quite frankly, I don't think any of these should stop you from booking. It might make you rethink your plans out there, but I think when you consider the bigger picture of cruising in general, especially among the mass market cruise lines, I think you're going to find that the innovation and the market leading aspect of Royal Caribbean really will draw you back to them. At the end of the day, some of these things are kind of just not so much deal breakers, but certainly considerations you have to deal with or make your peace with personally. I find that in most cases, it's not as bad as it sounds, meaning when you read a comment about this or a review, you might say, oh boy, that sounds terrible. But in practice and reality, they're not nearly as bad. Let me know in the comments below, though. Am I right on these things? Am I wrong on these things? And did I miss something that's truly the worst thing about cruising with Royal Caribbean? And should it stop those people from cruising? Let's have a good conversation about that in the comments below, keeping it civil, of course. And while you're down there below our video, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. That way, YouTube lets you know we have a brand new video to share. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.